Thank you very much, Sergio. As you may have seen yesterday, in this event, the moment for questions and comments is outside of this room, next to the coffee break, at lunch, etc. So I would like to invite you, because I'm sure you probably have many queries and questions regarding the information, the presentation of Javier Ballard and Sergio's presentation on the topic of how to apply this methodology, which is still on its experimental stages in some countries of the region. I would like to invite you to approach them directly and discuss anything with them, as we know it is the most interesting part of this kind of event. Very well, we will continue very quickly with two presentations about specific cases, recent specific cases in the region that have brought about profound transformations of the regulatory and institutional and budgetary frameworks for disaster risk management. We will see the case of Peru first, followed by the case of Colombia. It is interesting for you to keep in mind what is the thread that runs through this session, and it is what I told you, that governing essentially means to anticipate what will happen. Zoila Navarro is going to address us next. She's an advisor to the Minister of Economy and Finance of Peru. I think it's interesting that we will have a presentation from an institution which is traditionally not linked to risk management, but which in recent years has been every day more involved. If we say that risk management is a development policy, we must acknowledge that it is development institutions, those that have to promote risk management in all of the different government areas. Here we're going to have an example of a development institution in the case of Peru that had a very active participation in a process of political improvement and reform for disaster risk management. So I leave Zoila with you. Very well. Thank you very much. I would like to thank all of you for giving me the opportunity of sharing with you all of the experience of the Ministry of Economy and Finance of Peru regarding governability and disaster risk management. To begin, I would like to tell you that the participants, the stakeholders on risk management in our countries did not understand why suddenly the Ministry of Finance was so involved in this topic. So we have to say that Peru is a country that is highly vulnerable when facing threats and hazards. So if we compare ourselves with Haiti and Chile in the earthquake of 2010, we would have had losses for $43 billion approximately. And our country was not prepared to tackle such an important fiscal loss. It so happens that in 2009 and in 2010, with the government change, the municipalities and regional governments would go over and over to the Ministry of Finance to request funds for emergencies, and our minister said, what's going on? That every day we have to receive municipalities or presidents of regional governments who want to access more money, who need supplementary credits to their budgets. We, from the national budget, had resources to attend to the emergency, but then we have the query, which is we have resources to respond to the emergency, but what are we doing so that they do not come again and get and ask for resources again? What do we do so that next year, when we are in the rainy season, the request for additional resources is not the same or even more? What are we doing from the finance ministry with our function of the efficient use of public resources? And that is how we identify that from the Ministry of Finance we had not had a role on the efficient use of resources based on risk management with a perspective vision on which we should work with tools to identify the risk and mitigate it. We had an approach that came from civil defense, an approach that we, I'm sorry, have come across from since very early, to be prepared to respond to the emergency, but we had not made any progress on planning for sustainable development. And so, the baseline for us was of around 21%, and you will mean what country Sergio was referring to. And yes, I can tell you very proudly as a Peruvian citizen that we have made great progress in this on disaster risk management, but that at the same time, every day we face more challenges. And now, what's happening in 2010? The first thing that we identified is that we need a functional regulatory framework, modern, aligned with the best international practices, a framework that will include that prospective area of identification and mitigation. It so happens that the institution in charge of civil defense, preparedness, and attention to defense was working on a regulatory framework. However, from the presidency of the Ministers' Council, the need was defined to identify a neutral stakeholder that could be involved with international experience in order to validate and work on preparing this normative framework, not only from the side of being prepared to respond, but also of having the resources for its implementation, and not only from the national government, but also at subnational level. Thus, the ministry started working with a leading role on changing reforms on governability and risk management, putting together with the participation of other stakeholders a new regulatory framework, and a new regulatory framework that would include risk identification and that would reflect the importance of the participation of all stakeholders and risk management in a cross-sectional manner. Thus, our objective from the Ministry of Economy was not to lose fiscal stability facing a disaster, but at the same time, not only thinking of being prepared to respond, but also on initiating the implementation of responses and mechanisms going from identification and mitigation of risk. From the Ministry of Economy, we had to assess which was the legal framework that we had. And that is when we started thinking of taking care of the fiscal resources and being efficient with our resources. And so we see what do we have as a framework in the budgetary law, the law that allows for the government to get in debt, fiscal transparency, so that we could start working from the side of our competences. Amongst our commitments with disaster risk management, I must point out that the greatest commitment linked to governance was to lead all of this result and reform and all of this change in mindset of the public sector regarding disaster risk management. And so to create a structure for this change, we made sure to put together a budgetary program where we would focus and allocate resources to risk reduction, to risk management. We created a budgetary program based on results where the three government levels participate, which is multi-sectorial, for those sectors to be able to have a budgetary line where they could allocate resources for disaster risk management. Also through IDB collaboration and multilateral collaboration, South-South collaboration, we went to neighboring countries to learn about their experience on risk management. The Ministry of Finance did not even have a risk directorate, not even to assess financial and banking risks, even less so a direction that would assess fiscal risks. against the probability of a phenomenon such an earthquake to take place, to occur. Also, within the commitments, we also had the design of the financial structure, not only through budgetary resources, but also acquiring contingency credit lines, as well as other types of tools, such as conditioned transfers, where we have included goals to the municipalities linked to disaster risk management, and according to their compliance with these goals, they would get additional resources to those corresponding to them. We work in a new, different legal framework with an approach on planning for multi-sectorial cross-sectional development. At the same time, we created this budgetary program where we give the possibility to the three levels of government to assign a budget, allocate a budget for disaster risk management. We empower municipalities, who are the real executors, through a condition transfer program where they are injected additional resources linked to disaster risk management goals, and we created the risk directorate and continued implementing in the national system of public investment all of the issues related to risk management in all of the projects that were being put together. This tool then has different aspects which together have allowed us to make progress, important progress within the public sector. Most of us present here today know that all of our efforts take a long time. However, thanks to a multi-sectorial strategy so well articulated, have we been able to manage these advances in Peru. Only to comment on the issue of governability, Peru is a country that implements the policy of decentralization, and within the policy of decentralization, we have regulatory frameworks that we have to respect, such as the regulations of municipalities and sectional governments and regional governments, which has been more than a limitation, a very important challenge in implementing risk management, because in the new regulatory framework that we have, this gives a functional structure to the system, where a National Council of Disaster Risk Management exists that has the power and necessary force at the level of the President and his ministers, led by a Secretariat of Disaster Risk Management in the Presidency of the Ministers' Council, which is an institution of great political power, action and responsibility in order to lead risk management, focused on two technical organizations. One, which indeed, thanks to everything that has to do with the preparedness and attention to an emergency and reconstruction, and another one which is specifically focused on the prospective issues of identifying and mitigating risk, as well as on rebuilding, because rebuilding must take place through planning for new development. This functional structure reaches every sector besides the levels of government, and it has key stakeholders such as the armed forces, the Ministry of Economy with the financial strategy, and this is what is allowing us to make quick progress. Just to show you, the budgetary allocation for risk has changed a lot since the creation of this program. We can see how from 63 billion soles we have moved to 816 million soles, and how we have had a reduction of between 90 and 34%, and the real executive partners, who are municipalities, have increase their participation in budget allocation. Likewise, we are working on the financial protection strategy. And to conclude, I would like to share the conclusion that for us the new challenge lies in the fact that these indicators, as you can see, have improved since the approval of this new national system for disaster risk management. We have to implement more actions of monitoring, follow-up and control. These measures need to be monitored so that we can see if effectively we are achieving the objectives set, and so that far from moving backwards, they will be strengthened from now on.